The old versus the new, a fight that seems to have always existed in some capacity over the years. It seems like every time whenever a conflict like this springs up, it just never stops, since while one side doesn't like or accept the other side is just as stubborn. Though taking a step back here, when looking at the fandoms of various video game series, it seems like there will always be at least a few people who disagree over these things. But honestly, out of all of my experience, the fandom we're covering today might have the absolute worst case of it. Because as I'm sure you already know, today I'm finally going to cover the Fire Emblem fandom. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and welcome to the Fandom Files, the, I guess, monthly series, where I take you into the deepest rifts within each and every fandom. And I know, while Bendy did win the last poll, there just flat out wasn't enough there to warrant a video. But anyways, I'm not putting this off any longer. After being in a ton of polls, it's time to dive into the Fire Emblem fandom. For those unfamiliar with the whole Fire Emblem franchise, let me give you all some context. Developed by Intelligent Systems, and having roots as far back as the Famicom, Fire Emblem has been around for a lot longer than many people realize. I mean, hell, the first game actually localized worldwide was the 7th game in the series. So while the Japanese side of the fandom would make this one of the oldest fandoms I've ever covered, it's really only a fraction of the newer worldwide fandom originating from the game localized back in 2003. And while I'm sure the Japanese side of the fandom has had its own little incidents of discord here and there, today we'll be focusing on the Western side of things because honestly, the bad sides of this community are pretty unique as far as fandoms go. Because it's not like the fandom suffers from the usual problems of ship wars and whatnot. I mean, honestly, the bad eggs of the fandom don't really even bother others outside the fandom at all. What the Fire Emblem fandom does, however, have is a bad case of infighting, even rivaling that of the Sonic fandom of old. And the thing is, the grand majority of all this discord is actually relatively new. So to start from the source, let me take you all back to 2012 when Fire Emblem Awakening was released, a game that ended up being a huge entry point for many into the series. Well, here's the thing about Awakening. While the game itself was quite the success, compared to past games in the series, it wasn't without its flaws. So of course, once the game was released, it was fairly criticized by the community as expected. Well, unfortunately, while most people were civil about things and respected when other fans disagreed with them, a vocal minority of elitists began to form within the fandom, harassing anyone who even as much as liked Awakening. And considering that now a huge portion of the fandom was inhabited by new fans brought in by Awakening, this proved to be quite the problem. Though at least at this point, there wasn't that large of a divide yet, considering how small the vocal minority of elitists were. However, at the same time, there was something else brewing within the fandom, a bit of a hate dump, if you will, all surrounding one of the new characters introduced in Awakening, Naui. Now, Naui, just as a character, is a bit of a special case. At first glance, she appears to be a girl no more than around 12 to 13 years old, right? Well, nope, not at all. Naui is actually both over 1,000 years old and a dragon. So with that in mind, considering she's technically an adult, the game allows you to pair her with other characters including yourself. And considering that she looks like an actual child, it left a few people feeling understandably weirded out, myself included. And believe me, whether you like or dislike the character for whichever reason, it's all okay. In the end, we all have our own opinions. However, what isn't okay are the two distinct groups of people that arose from Naui's conception. The people who have an obsession with hating Naui, acting a lot like the aforementioned elitists, and the people obsessed with Naui for less than savory reasons. Just use your imagination for the last one. While both groups have had their heydays of idiocy, thankfully now, they've both receded into their own little slimy corners of the internet, for the most part never to be seen again. So now, 3 full years have passed past, and intelligent systems are releasing their newest main entry in the Fire Emblem franchise, Fire Emblem Fates, a game that, to the dismay of some and to the joy of others, built on a lot of Awakening's newer aspects. All of a sudden, that minuscule group of elitists from before were reborn anew, even more vocal than ever before. Especially when it came to the conquest side of Fates, the infighting grew pretty rough, with many of these self-proclaimed true Fire Emblem fans demeaning anyone who even as much as enjoyed any of the Fates games. And on a bit of a side note here, since this seems to plague every fandom at some point or another, there's no such thing as a true fan of anything. Like seriously, once you're a fan of something, you're a fan of something. There's no kind of weird tier system that comes with it. Just because you've been into something longer than someone else doesn't give you the right to absolutely demean them. In Fire Emblem's case, sure, you can always give them pointers and whatnot on what games are better from your experience, but the weird superiority complex these supposed true fans get is crazy. Remember though, there's a big difference between actively dismissing and attacking people for liking something and having a discussion on why you may or may not like something. You'd be surprised how many people confuse the two. Though now, taking a much needed break from all of that, I feel it's time for a fandom story. For this story, let's call our protagonist Robin. At the time, Robin along with a small group of others had been working on a Fire Emblem fan game for the longest time. Well, when the game was already quite a ways into development, there was this one guy who joined the team. For anonymity's sake, we'll call him Gangrel. Well, as the game was being put together, each member of the development team had their own integral roles in contributing to its development, with Gangrel providing art. Well, from the start, Gangrel always seemed a bit fishy considering how often his art styles would change when providing art for the game. So after Robin acted on his suspicions and did some digging, to his and the entire development team's dismay, Gangrel had been stealing art the entire time. Now, art theft is no laughing matter, and if the game had gone out with that same stolen art within it, Gangrel would have effectively destroyed Robin and his team's reputation within the community. So with evidence in hand, Robin decided to finally confront Gangrel about his art theft and remove him from the team entirely. Of course, as expected, Gangrel did everything from denying accusations to playing the victim card. But instead of doing the team he almost ruined even the slightest favor by leaving quietly, he instead began to harass Robin in particular with everything you could imagine, from spamming gore porn to even blackmailing him. Thankfully, after a couple of months, Gangrel finally gave up and went back to whatever slime he spawned from originally. But needless to say, the entire experience shook Robin up pretty badly. Though getting back to the games themselves, since Fates came out, there's been one more entry in the series that has somehow caused an equal, if not larger amount of vitriol within the fandom. And this time, it's not even your traditional console game. Everyone, I give you Fire Emblem Heroes, a mobile app that came out a bit over a year ago now. Well, in Heroes, basically, it's kind of like a crossover kind of deal, where you can get characters from all over the franchise. So as you'd expect, many fans from across the community were all for it, including myself. But the thing is, it's not even really anything in the game itself that caused any real outrage. Instead, it more has to do with how the characters within the game are treated. What do I mean by that? Well, like other mobile games similar to Heroes, through in-game events, certain characters will receive alternate versions of themselves, commonly referred to as alts. The issue is, to the dismay of many from the fandom, Heroes, at least in more recent times, has really just been laying it down, with adding more and more alts into the game rather than actual new characters. And while it's completely fine to be upset with it all, some particularly vocal people in the fandom took things a tad bit too far. Just take the whole situation surrounding Lyn, where as of now, including alt, there are 5 Lyns in the game. Of course, with that, many people voiced their concerns, and that's fine. But unfortunately, there were a few individuals that were so obsessed with the matter that, similarly to the Naui situation, situation, they would harass anyone that was even as much as indifferent with the whole situation concerning Lynn. I mean, come on, in the end, it's just a mobile app. Sure, getting frustrated is understandable and completely fine, but never should you let that frustration actually bring you to attacking people. But you know what? I feel like that's enough for the bad side of the fandom, because overall, and especially on sites like Reddit and the Serene's Forest forums, the fandom is honestly one of the most positive out there. It really is incredible how many of the discussions within these forums are positive. Plus, the hefty amount of fan art that the fandom churns out on a near daily basis is really top-notch. Of course, there will always be the stinkers that inhabit the dark, slimy corners of the fandom, but honestly, if the aforementioned positive majority just keeps setting a good example as they have, I'm sure that the vocal minority of idiots will either see the fault in their actions or just give up entirely. Though don't click away from the video just yet, because I have an important announcement for you all. Since around 2 or so weeks ago, I've been streaming weekly on Twitch. Before, I used to stream erratically on my second channel, but now that I have more time to do things, expect me to stream on Twitch at the very least 3 times a week. In fact, I'll be streaming on Twitch today at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so do check me out. Plus, I really just have to thank all of you who've sent me fan art over the past few months. From now on, I'll be featuring them in all of my outros, so do keep sending them my way. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe, and if you want to see a more positive outlook on things, check out my last video. I get the feeling that not too many of you did. But anyways, today's cool thing of the day is the recently announced Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, as someone who's been a fan of Smash for around 8 to 9 years now, the fact that they're bringing back literally every single goddamn character that's ever been in the series is absolutely insane. Like, I'm not even kidding here. I've considered going into competitive Smash before, but this shit just may be the thing to fully get me into it. Like, I could seriously gush about everything that they revealed for the entire length of this video, but for now, I'll just leave it at that. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic. At least we can all agree that this is a nightmare.